Hark the sound of myriad voices rising in their might. 'Tis the daughters of Columbia pleading for the right. Raise the flag.
Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for this Art in Libraries virtual program. We are excited to present this along with the West Virginia Women Vote Coalition. I'm Sally Brown Deskins, Exhibits Coordinator for WVU Libraries and Lead Curator of Undefeated, canvassing the politics around voter suppression since women's suffrage. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be documented on the library's website for public viewing. We encourage you to use the speaker viewing on Zoom. The program is presented in the Chautauqua style, which consists of 3 segments. First, a monologue by Mrs. Coralie Franklin Cook. Second, Mrs. Franklin Cook takes questions and answers. And lastly, Ms. Evans will introduce herself and answer questions as the scholar and actress. We welcome questions in the chat box and we will address them at the end of the presentation. We will also post a survey link to get your feedback on the session. I am honored to turn this over to former delegate and former Mayor Charlene Marshall, who was a Democratic member of the West Virginia House of Delegates, representing the 44th District from 2004 until 2014, and served as House Chaplain since 2004 as well. She earlier served as a delegate from 1998 through 2002, and was the mayor of Morgantown, West Virginia, from 1991 until 1998. Welcome, former delegate and former Mayor Marshall.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part. Miss Ilene Evans is an inspired storyteller, performer, and scholar who weaves music, poetry, dance, and drama to bring history alive. Miss Evans creates and presents storytelling, theater programs, and workshops, seminaries in the form, education, and entertainment for audiences young and old. She has toured extensively across the United States and internationally with her historical and original works. In 2009, Ms. Evans worked with the staff of the United States State Department to tour Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Colombia to share African American history and culture through arts, education, literature, and music. In 2015, she traveled to Ghana, and in 2018 to Tanzania. She has received the Foundation of Freedom Award from Wheeling Jesuit University for her outstanding work. She is a Chautauqua scholar, developing presentations of historical women who have contributed significantly to African American culture. Selected by the United States Embassy to share her work in the history and culture of African Americans, Ms. Evans' historical storytelling presentations include Harriet Tubman, Memphis, Tennessee Garrison, Carrie Williams, Coralie Franklin Cook, Ethel Waters, Bessie Coleman, and numerous other women of significant history. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce to some and to present to others Miss Ilene Evans. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to this rally. My name is Coralie Franklin Cook, and it has been my pleasure to work alongside so many of you faithful people looking to help us regain what we have earned, our full citizenship, our franchise, our right to vote. Please join with me in one of our club songs that we like to start our meetings with. We represent the women who were once denied a place of the African invention of the highly favored race. Nothing daunted, we have struggled, and we've made ourselves a place. Our motto, deeds, not words. You can join me in the chorus. Deeds, not words, shall be our motto. Deeds, not words, shall be our motto. Deeds, not words, shall be our motto. We're lifting as we climb. I am so honored to be included with some of my colleagues from the sorority, from the Deltas, from the National Association of Colored Women, from the Red Cross. There are our veterans here tonight, and we must unite our voices yet again on behalf of the journey and the struggle that we have been in for so long. As I was going through my papers, one of my students brought me a pamphlet that his father had from Georgia. It said, "What a colored man should do to vote." I was outraged when I first saw this, not because we had rules by which we needed to abide, but that they were applied in such a way as to prevent those who had rightfully gained that franchise and should be included. And today, I am also speaking because these same rules have been applied to the women. It has been 10 years since we have passed that 19th Amendment. 1920 seems a long time ago to still be struggling and facing the same restrictions that our men did. Here in the southern states, we looked for not only the poll tax, but registration with a certificate of an amount of money paid for being able to join in, for a residency requirement from 6 months to a year, and then 6 months in the county in which you live, for the literacy tests, where you must not only read part of the Constitution, but you must be able to read whichever section that person is registering you requires. And if you do not answer to their pleasure, then you will be denied your right. It was 1870 when we were granted citizenship and that all citizens shall have the right to vote. I remember these times because I was 9 years old. 9 years old in 1870. And that was a year my mother and father remember well, where we had stepped forward to Storer College. We had become a part of that family that was learning and being educated. It was there we learned that we needed to address not just the head, but the hands and the heart as well. To cultivate the head, the hands, the heart, industry, intelligence, and spiritual cultivation, because it would bind the soul and it would keep that person able to withstand the storms, to have the courage needed in that moral compass, because the joy of freedom depends upon these things. So imagine our sisters and brothers in South Carolina, North Carolina, in Georgia, Florida, Texas, Alabama, who are fighting yet this same set of restrictions. When I think of what it is we need to do to stand next to them, to support them, to help them go with their families to the polls, to register, and to make sure that their voice, if possible, can be heard. There are so many struggles that we have faced along the way. I was born in 1861, just as the nation was torn asunder, born under the tyranny of slavery. I remember the price of our freedom. I remember how dear it was held by my mother and my father. You see, my mother was one of those last people from Thomas Jefferson's Monticello plantation, one who could claim lineage from our father founding this nation. To understand what freedom is, to serve it to others, and yet be denied it yourself is a personal memory. And when the people who were establishing Storer College came to our small home, my sister and I had been involved in their classes and their small school there in Lexington. They invited my mother and father to come to Storer to be a part of the family there. And their for the first generation, their children would be fully educated and be able to participate in this democracy we hold so dear. When my mother and father said the word freedom, we were stirred. When my father said the word freedom, it was like a clarion bell, a shout, an announcement. And when my mother said the word freedom, her voice trembled, and it sent a shiver through us, like a whisper carrying a prayer. She held us like we might slip away, and we loved her for it. That's how we knew we mattered. We were loved into freedom, into this new land, this land of freedom. My mother and father had the will to hold that family together. And in this land, even though there were those who had prophesied our extinction at the point of emancipation, who were still working toward the annihilation of our race, it didn't matter that to them. They had arrived. We were free, and we were all learning with a purpose. That's how I knew what it meant to be this first generation, living in freedom and loving each other through the hard times. I am glad day long for this gift of song, for time and change and wonder, for sunset things and whirlwind dreams that hang on the edge of tomorrow. I am glad for these points apart that lift our hearts in wonder, where dreams rush in from the rush and din like sheep from the rain and thunder. The sound of our people's voice in our ears hold us to the task. And yet again, I reached back, was 1870. Then again, in 1875, with the Black Codes enacted, we moved forward in spite of it all. Then we moved. It was a time for the parade. 1913, the Women's Parade. It would gather in Washington, D.C. Women of all races, women standing shoulder to shoulder to show the nation how we were a solid voice and had earned this right to be included in the population. March 1913, right before President Wilson would be inaugurated, we were at the point of such hope and determination. We thought the country was coming to a new understanding, embracing the value that women had to offer. We met with a sorrow that day, a betrayal and a brokenheartedness that has yet to be repaired. And that heartbreak came between us as colored women and the white sisters who we had walked through the valleys with. I remember because Susan B. Anthony and I had shared many a conversation, trying to build a bridge between the races. And though we would speak at rallies and together on one another's behalf, it seems that the Southern contingent continued to fray, to divide, and to bedazzle the efforts of bringing together the embracing of that amendment. I remember the day very well. I awoke to the sound of the birds singing and my husband's smile. Oh, he supported our venture to have the vote. Many men did. We had Frederick Douglass speaking, and we had W.B. Du Bois speaking. All of these people stood steadfastly behind their women. I think our white sisters did not understand that we had our men's support to a great degree. And with that, he ushered me out into the day. I was grateful for that. He would watch from the balconies And I hoped to join my sisters from Howard. There was Mary Church Terrell. Ida B. Wells had brought in her group from Chicago. There were women from New York, from Storr College. We at all would be 8,000 strong going down Pennsylvania Avenue because the permits were already purchased. The police had been brought in to help along with the order. Alice Paul had set out the program, which included the beautiful photograph of Inez Milhone on her white horse. Oh, she had laid the parade out like a blueprint, in fact. And we started our day. I think you know this poem, you club women of mine. And if you know the prayer, please recite it with me. Almighty God, help us to understand that injustice to anyone or to any class or race must inevitably return upon the heads of those who countenance it. Make us determined to live by truth and not by lies, to found our common life on the eternal foundations of love, and no longer to prop the tottering house of wrong by legalized cruelty and force. Help us to make the welfare of all the supreme law of the land, that so our commonwealth may be built strong and secure on the love of all of its citizens. As we would bring the day in, our hearts were filled with so much anticipation. As we come marching, marching, we bring the greater days. For a rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge or idler, in that toil where one reposes. For the people hear us singing bread and roses, bread and roses. And the songs that filled our hearts were interrupted by one of the people from the parade committee who said that there had been a problem, some wrangling behind closed doors. Well, that always meant trouble. And evidently, again, the Southern contingent had protested our inclusion in the parade. And she assured us that they had come to a compromise in spite of their resistance. And that compromise would be that we would walk at the back of the parade. In this way, we would be able to continue. Ida B. Wells would have none of it. And she left immediately. Others of us discussed what we might do to return, to go to the back of the parade, and others did as they chose. I decided to join my husband, George, up in the balcony, and my niece was continuing on and was able to write about the parade later from down on the street. But as we watched from above, when the parade started, though it was late, it seemed that suddenly a surge came into the crowd, people crowding in from every different direction. And we found these were not supporters of suffrage, but angry opponents who had come early in order to be a part of Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. They were violently opposed to suffrage. They started to grab women, throw them to the side. They threw their lit cigar butts into their faces, and they were starting to get kicked and hurt. Many women were injured. Where we were able to move down the causeway of Pennsylvania Avenue 5 across, now we were barely able to see the women moving in single file. Alice Paul brought her car to try to make a path. And in time, the Red Cross wagons even had trouble getting to the injured. So many women became hurt that day. It called for Henry Stinson, the Secretary of War, to reach out to Fort Myers, to send the mounted brigades. They enforced order, and the parade went on, slowly, but they reached their goal to the Treasury, and then there was the program they had intended to put on, an allegory, an allegorical story. 8,000 women, working women, farm women, teachers. There were women from all over the country, women where they'd already had suffrage out in the West, women from across the sea in England and other countries where they were fighting for it as well. But we felt that our white sisters no longer carried a banner that included us. And it gave us that sense of why we had to reach out to one another across club lines and to form one from many other clubs. From Boston, there was the one in Philadelphia, the one here in Washington, D.C. And we formed the National Association of Colored Women out of that because we needed to work together. We'd seen this as early as 1894, and we built that coalition then. I think of Susan B. Anthony today. She did not live to see the passage of that amendment, but she worked hard for a union between all women. I was one of the few people to visit her in her home in New York. We spoke on each other's behalf. We stood together. I know that these things are possible, but how many more barriers will we face? We, as people of color today, must find a way to lift one another up. We have found since emancipation that no matter how high we climb, we must lift others as we go. And so that is what you'll hear echoed in our mottos across all of our different divisions. And then the time came, 1970. The call went out. The call went out far and wide. Our people were called on to fight in another war for this country. Soldiers and stevedores, ambulance drivers, electricians, carpenters. They did not hesitate to volunteer when Woodrow Wilson put out that call to defend freedom in Europe. So many of our men came from West Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and into the regiments they fell. We, my husband George and I, were helpful in getting those men who were qualified, who had had enough education to go to be trained as officers so that they would be able to have command over their own men in their own regiments. And they stood next to the French, bloodied by the same enemy. The French did not demean our ability to defend the innocent, to stand by them in their hour of need. And so many of our troops came back with medals of honor, the highest the French could give them. And when they returned home, they were met with violence. We called it the Bloody Summer of 1919. It wasn't just that our men in uniform might be found lynched, but that their homes would be sought out, where other veterans would be venerated, would be lifted up, would be honored, would be given dinners. We saw that there were entire towns that were burnt down to the ground. In Chicago, when we understand that mobs came into Black neighborhoods, specifically targeting veterans, the waving of a flag did not protect us. though we had stood strong and shown our worth yet again to be considered full citizens of this nation, granted that most valuable gift, the franchise, the right to vote. Dr. Du Bois wrote initially as the war began, and he said, "You must return. You must put down the fight we have at home until this fight overseas is won." But once he saw the treatment of our veterans, he had this response. He said, "We return. We return from fighting. We return fighting. Make way for democracy. We saved it in France. And by the great Jehovah, we will save it in the United States of America, or know the reason why." Standing by the actions of our people, which have long proven the worth of our inclusion. It wasn't too long after the parade that Dr. Du Bois asked me to write an article for the magazine of the NAACP, from the Crisis magazine. He asked me to write an article about votes for mothers. Well, he had asked a number of the club women to submit articles because he was having symposiums on women's right to vote and what they had to offer us, offer the nation, offer our community, offer beyond their small domestic sphere. And I wondered about that assignment. I'd wondered if anybody in all of this world had ever considered a man's right to vote according to his status as a father. And yet I was asked to write something about mothers as if they were a peculiar and distinct people. Well, maybe they are, or they ought to be. Because a woman who goes out to meet that death angel in order for a child to be born returns from that journey not only the mother of her own adored babe, but the near mother to all children. And as she serves that little one, there grows within her a passion to serve all humanity, not just by race or class or sex, but all of God's creatures as they have been made. And it is not strange that enlightened womanhood has so far advanced to understand that in order to perform such service, women must both help to create and administer the laws under which she lives. Who wouldn't understand a woman's skill in determining the significance of educational institutions, of the proper conduct of correctional institutions and charitable organizations? She should know about sanitation and municipal ordinances. Who better to determine the placement of a red light district than a mother whose sons they're meant to lure to degradation and death? Who better to determine when a young lady may barter her own body than the mother? Aye, to their eternal shame. We have seen the men place on the statute books the age of 16, 14, 12, aye, to their eternal shame, 10 and 8 as the years of consent. If a man had to choose his own mother, would he choose a bondwoman or a free woman? I believe that discrimination because of sex is curiously like discrimination because of race. It cripples the individual, it handicaps progress, it sets a limit on growth. I grow directly in proportion to that ability for me to access those gifts that I have been given by Mother Nature, the great All-Mother. I grow in breadth, in depth, in vision, in the power to do just as I am able to leverage those gifts within myself. And I give to that child who is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, thought of my thought, somewhat of my own strength and weaknesses. When my mother came, shortly after my child was born, George Jr., I remember that he would ask for her to come, and she would come and sit by his bedside, and she would sing. Mothers remember, mothers hold the stories of generations from generation to generation. And she would sing, and she would read him poetry or recite him. One of her favorites was that one. An angel robed in spotless light bent down and kissed the sleeping night. Night woke to blush, the sprite was gone. Men saw the blush and called it dawn. Mothers remember. There's something about that part of our world that we need. When I think of the voting, when I think of what we have, not only as women, but as mothers, to offer this world, a sensibility. She would sing. She'd sing a song that she said was my song. It was the song about me as a little girl. Jaybird sitting in the top of the tree looking down at me. Jaybird sitting in the top of the tree looking down at me. Oh, swing, swing, swing. Oh, swing, little Coralie. Oh, swing, swing, swing. Swing, little Coralie. I found those moments my mother spent with my son just as precious as did he. I think this is part of our moral education. The head, the hands, and the heart need this binding, need this memory, or else we come to freedom in fear of the loss of our very soul. What does it mean to have freedom and to lose our soul in the process? There are those who would have us choose between intellect or industry. They ask the wrong question, I believe. I see these things not being in competition, but actually necessary for the strength and the health of our communities. For that life and that growth depends on these things. Neglect not what these aspects are for our freedom. Our head, our hands, our heart, our moral compass set with compassion, with honor, with courage. We have fought this fight, and we have been stained in our own blood for it. I urge you not only to register your families for voting, but also to reach out to those who may have a struggle getting to these places. If you are able to help others in the South with their poll tax or their registration or their residency requirements, please reach out. Our family network is wide and deep and long. We know that we can speak for ourselves and that our voices can be heard through our votes. Thank you so much for being a part of our journey this evening. Our veterans, our Red Cross, our community service, There are those who've come from the Great War. I want to give you all my thanks and gratitude for standing for freedom, even when it has been denied to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Franklin Cook. We already have a couple of questions, and you can post them in the chat box or you can unmute. I'm going to ask the first two questions now. Mrs. Franklin Cook, can you tell us the role of Storer College in your suffrage efforts? Did you meet with resistance or support?
Storer College was a very important part, not only of our training, but of our sense of values. Storer did not turn anyone away. This was one of the very first schools coming out of emancipation. And so you would find young people in those classrooms right along with parents, along with people who were learning to read for the first time. And then now and then there would be, white students involved and invited and included. Storer College set an example of what we can and should be. Though the community around Storer College was hostile, we had to have a closed campus. We had to keep our students close at hand. They were not allowed to wander, as well as our teachers. Our teachers, if they found themselves in the middle of town in Harper's Ferry, might find themselves under attack. And this was something we wanted to avoid at all costs. So we knew the value of community, of staying close. And we also looked at our young ladies as the next generation who should be stepping into all levels of responsibility, whether it is dealing with domestic issues or issues of civil and municipal ordinances.
Thank you so much. Our next question from Amanda. Mrs. Cook, could you describe what it was like to work for the passage and then ratification of the 19th Amendment?
Well, it has involved many meetings, many conversations, and many opportunities to reach out and across boundaries. There are barriers that have been put up. Some are artificial, some are waiting to be broken, and others seem impenetrable. I want to say that my husband and I both have taken on the Baha'i faith, because the Baha'i have continued where the Baptists left off. Even within our churches, we have found great resistance to the idea of women and their equal contribution to our living and governance. It's with the Baha'i faith where they have placed women in any number of positions of authority that we have another example of reaching across what seems like a chasm, but is something that must be proven. And as we prove ourselves as women in positions of power, then we gain trust. This is what it is like. Whether you're sewing for the Red Cross, or you are taking young people on their first walk to the John Brown house there on Storer's campus.
Thank you so much. I can open up to another couple of questions for Mrs. Franklin Cook. Would anyone like to unmute or post your question in the chat box? I was going to ask if if your time living in West Virginia had an impact on your work for the passage of the 19th Amendment. That's my question.
Thank you for your question. I think that we had a number of opportunities in West Virginia that others might not have. And one of those opportunities was to purchase a boarding house. And we were able to then provide a safe space for different people to travel and have conversations and to pull out of the city. Likewise, our home on Howard's campus there became a rallying place for young students, for students who were trying to move forward. I was a part of the Deltas, but you see, we also, that's the sorority there, and the Zetas, the AKAs, and later the Gamma Rhos came. But these sororities had mission well beyond a social society, a social group. They would take on different projects based on literacy, based on cleanliness, based on exposure to different educational opportunities. And so in this way, there were many different components, I would say, to how we looked at building the people we wanted to be involved in suffrage, to be involved in the vote, to be involved, proving ourselves on many levels. I don't know if you know, most of the young women coming out of stores spoke 2 or 3 different languages, whether it was French or German, and we were able to stand toe to toe in literature, in philosophy, in sciences, in any kind of industrial artistic expression. These are all aspects of suffrage for women to be able to participate fully in the world around them.
Thank you so much. I have a few more questions here. One that ties to that response. What were the distinctions among the sororities as they affected the struggle? Were they about class?
I would not point to class as much as I would the specific mission. Some were focused more on I want to say literary aspects. Some might focus more on community projects. Some were a little more heady, some were focused on children. And it just was the group of women and which kind of mission they were called toward at that time. They are similar, but they did have different personalities.
Okay, and another question here. Can you share what it meant to you and your family to be descendants of Thomas Jefferson?
Well, my mother spoke of it. I was so young at the time. The little that I remember was carried forward in her stories. We had other family who had, there were other groups out of that large population there at Monticello. Some went to Liberia, some gained their freedom and went overseas. Others stayed here in the United States, and our family was that side of things. And we had the kind of exposure to culture, to a certain level of access that many others did not. There was great wealth around that opportunity. Though we weren't able to participate in it directly, having understood it gave us a sense that we needed to aspire toward it.
Thank you. 2 more questions. Mrs. Franklin Cook, were you involved in any way with the Niagara Movement meeting at Storer College in 1906, which your brother-in-law helped organize?
Yes, I was there. I actually was there. I was not in the photograph because I had taken quite an emotional turn that day. That was the day when we found that the founder of our Storer College had passed away also. But there in 1906, yes, I had been a part and a parcel of Storer College. Our home was there, and so much of my growth was rooted there. I was one of the first ones on their board. I was one of their first people of African descent who was a teacher there as well. And so, yes, the Niagara Movement, being invited to come, was a very special thing, an important part of my life, yes.
Thank you. And last question for Mrs. Franklin Cook. Tell us about the first time you voted and what it meant to you.
there's something about walking into a place that you have been denied. It breaks like a cascade over you to realize upon whose shoulders you stand and for whom you are casting that vote. Your people and the people beyond your people and those people in the future. It is a powerful thing.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. It was amazing, and I'd like to invite Mrs. Evans to introduce herself.
Good afternoon. My name is really Ilene Evans, yes. And you got a longer introduction at the beginning than I had hoped for getting to know Mrs. Franklin Cook, long life, very active and very involved. So if you have some questions that you'd like to ask that she might not have been able to respond to, we could have some questions on that end now. This project is built out of Voices from the Earth, and our company is a not-for-profit, and we build primarily now, we're doing branches of American history. And we have had the theme of suffrage this year. And we've moved through World War I, we moved through the Civil War in 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, on and on. So we continue to encourage others to tell their stories and to find those kind of narratives that will lift all of us up and be stories of courage and strength and endurance and so on. And so that's one of the aspects of what I do as both an artist and an artistic director. And if you have some questions for Miss Eileen, now would be that time.
Yes, our first question. Can you tell us how you discovered Coralie and what inspired you to tell her story?
Coralie Franklin Cook came to me through one of our colleagues, Connie Park-Rice, who is a history professor at WVU. And she's one of the experts in West Virginia history. And she brought Coralie Franklin Cook to my attention because her dissertation, her PhD, was on the brother-in-law that you mentioned, J.R. Clifford, one of the first lawyers of West Virginia, and soldier in the Civil War and had the Martinsburg Press. And Coralie wrote articles for her brother-in-law's paper. He married her older sister. And as my colleague was looking at this, she said, "Eileen, you look like her." And I thought, oh, okay, let me learn about her. I'll learn about her. I have not stopped learning about her. So not only is she a West Virginian, she's one of those early graduates and showed, well, led the way through academics and through social activities, leading social justice. She was on the Board of Education in DC for many years. And her involvement in having officers trained to be prepared for World War I was another aspect of this I found just really intriguing, touching many different parts of our history.
Thank you. And I put voicesfromtheearth.org in the chat box for everyone. What other questions do people have? You can unmute if you'd like, or type your questions in the chat box. Miss Eileen, you're performing from the Folk Life Center at Fairmount State.
Yes, the Frank and Jane DeBoer Folk Life Center is a real treasure, a repository. I am standing next to the African American exhibit that they have. Down the way, there's the Irish American, there's Cole over here. And I think behind me is an Italian exhibit. And so the capturing of the stories of the people of our state is really an important mission that the Folklife Center here has. And we're very lucky to be on Fairmont State's campus.
And tell us about you have an upcoming performance, I believe?
Maybe.
Oh, okay. I thought you did.
I do, I'm sure I do. I just, yes. Next Sunday at 2, I'll be portraying Ethel Waters. It'll be a Facebook Live event. And so if you go to our Voices from the Earth, Inc. on Facebook page, that's the name on our Facebook page, has the ink on it. Then you can sign up or just join us live at 2 o'clock. And it's about a half-an-hour program. We've been trying to keep some of these presentations short in our video virtual world so that it's a little bit easier to manage than a full hour program. So that's October 4th, Sunday at 2, and Facebook Live.
Excellent. We've got lots of brava, thank you in the chat box. Any other questions? Please feel free to. Oh, yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you. Hi there. Hi. Thank you so much. This was, especially your last comment, was so moving. I'm wondering whether there were challenges or how you dealt with challenges of keeping the, I don't know if it's balance, but allowing us both to hear the sadness of the white women's inabilities, moral inabilities or historical inabilities, to let us know about that at the same time as you kept the very sort of upbeat tone of your entire presentation. Was that a artistic challenge, a historical challenge? It just fascinates me as we learn about the things we're ashamed of as well as the things we're proud of.
Oh, well, it's a very good question. Thank you for the question. And to answer you, the short answer is yes. It is a challenge, but I have to bring you her personality, which is not a defeatist one, not a bitter one, not an angry one. I think the where I'm able to sharpen her edge came from letters that she wrote to Baha'u'llah after his visit in 1912 to Howard University. And many of the professors there were moved by the way they approached not just integration, but the sense that Black people specifically had a very specific gift to offer the world, of an important value that was necessary for the next evolution of us as humans. And they saw it as a metaphor. The metaphor was that Black people, they considered the pupil of the eye. And if you read the Baha'i materials, they still have a very strong adherence to that kind of radical equality, but also that each of us have different gifts to give. And this idea that people of African descent in the entire diaspora have an ability to focus light, to focus and use light, that it gave the sense of purpose that we not only belong at the table, we are necessary for the health of all of us. And so that kind of attitude in the background allows me then to historically, plausibly place you in this setting and invite you to be a part of that energy moving forward. So yes, it's a challenge, it's an artistic challenge, and it's a choice, because that is the kind of world I want to live in too.
Thank you so much. That was so valuable.
Thank you. Thank you. You're very welcome.
Oh, we have one more question, if you have time. How old was Mrs. Franklin Cook when she voted, and what did she write about it?
I don't have a record of her actually voting. That's something I have so that I can give it to you literally. I know the importance of it to her and the family and all of the people around her. So I can assume that she did, that she would have been registered there in Washington, D.C. I mean, probably in Harper's Ferry because they couldn't vote in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Any other last questions? I put the link to Voices from the Earth Facebook in the chat, as well as the event that Miss Eileen mentioned in the chat, and I will also email that to you all as well. Any last questions? Oh, one more question. Have you given this presentation to Hemmings family reunions?
No. They've just barely gotten to be able to talk to one another. I'm not sure that they would be ready for something like this. But she is included now on the website in Monticello. And so you'll see the family breakdown from the Edmondson side that would lead to Coralie's mother and then to her. But, you know, this is a big extended family. And there are a lot of little rabbit holes to go down. So if you wanted to, you could find it still. They have lineage and genealogies on the Monticello website.
Thank you so much. Anything else to add, Miss Eileen?
Well, I want to thank you and thank you for sponsoring our program today and inviting everyone and doing all of the hard work, and to Ms. Charlene and for all of the tech that goes behind these conferences. And even at the last minute, we were struggling with the right email. So I appreciate your hanging in there and being very, very conscientious. And thank you to everyone listening. I hope you go and vote. I hope that you know, if I could say vote many times, I might say that. But, we are at a point where I think some of our generations have lost the value of what this really means and what has been sacrificed in order for us to have this right be unimpeded. And we face more trickery all the time. So the battle is not over, and your participation is really an important part of it. So thank you very much for all that you do. Keep being strong out there. We need you.
Yes, I'll echo that. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was such an honor. And we posted a little survey link in the chat box. I'm going to, this is also, like we said, being recorded. It will be on YouTube next week. I will send that in the email as well. And Miss Eileen's next presentation, I'll link that. And then our next presentation is October 9th with Becky Kane. And I just put that in the chat box. That'll go out in the email as well. Thank you again so much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.